Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of of tasteful solos, looking at Porcupine Tree, which also features Steven Wilson, who we checked out yesterday. Today we're going to be looking at the track Time Flies. There's an official video for it, so we got that rolling. Let's dive in and see how today's tasty solo treats us.
I was born in '67, the year of Sergeant Pepper, and all you experienced.
Just really hanging on to this one sound, very little movement going on at all.
Into a suburb of heaven, yeah, and it should have been forever. It all seemed to make so much sense. But after a while, you realize time flies. And the best thing that you can do is take whatever comes to you. 'Cause time flies.
I like the drum part in here, playing off of the percussiveness of the acoustic guitar. Bass providing us with more momentum than anything else really at the moment.
She said, luck is all you make it. You just reach out and take it. Now let's dance a while. She said, nothing ever happens if you don't make it happen. And if you can't laugh and smile.
Dude, those really tight snare rolls are so good.
But after a while, you realize time flies. And the best thing that you can do is take whatever comes to you. 'Cause time flies. And laughing under soda showers is still the way I see you now.
It's interesting, this is the second time we've had an expansion of the guitar ideas, and both of them have harkened back to an earlier era. So I like how there's a little bit of movement in here, but it shifted to an introspective idea, emotionally. The synth has been extremely withheld this whole track, quietly sitting on the outskirts of the song. Ooh. Yeah, so I'm feeling this in like a 3/4, and if we group that into two sets of 3, we get a 6-beat phrase. We get a snare on 5. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's an interesting place to put it. The piano on the outskirts is giving us a polyrhythm, a 4/4, against the 3 of the drums. I love the size of the guitar versus the volume of it. Yeah, just a solo about pain.
Could tell you what I'm thinking while we sit here drinking, but I'm not sure where to start.
I think this is the same rhythm from the opening.
You see, there's something wrong here. I'm sorry if I'm not clear.
Yeah, but there's movement now. We have a triplet thing going on the outskirts.
But after a while, you realize time flies. And the best thing that you can do is take whatever comes to you. 'Cause time
Yeah, it's a
And the coach you are to Alton Towers is still the way I see you now.
it's a reimagination of the static writing that dominated the first half of the song. The snare, yeah, the snare hitting on 2 while the guitars change chords on 1. Gorgeous ending here with tons of energy though. Wait, is that how it legitimately ends? Or is that just for the music video? There is no way we just have that dun 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 on the guitar so faint in the last couple of beats. Huh. Alright. So this song exists in 3 parts for me. We have the opening, like 5-minute section, which is all about static concepts. A lot of ideas that don't go anywhere, punctuated with these moments of retro guitar work that sits between, I think it sits between choruses and a return back to a verse, sort of like a post-chorus idea that tends to have a little bit more explosive movement to it. So we sort of have this verse, chorus, guitar interlude, verse, chorus, guitar interlude. I think we have a third verse chorus, but I could be a little off on that. The verse in the chorus, though, is entirely dedicated to static ideas. It's just the guitar playing a chord for like, it's gotta be like 4 or 5 seconds at a time, right? Just playing this rhythm against it, and then after we play that for 4 cycles, we'll go to the next chord. It's a very slow chord progression on these. The first time through, we don't even have drums with it. It's just the piano, the guitar, and the vocals. And so we do have some layer building up over time, but for the most part, it's about static movement. It's about not going anywhere too quick. And it's juxtaposed with these guitar interludes that have a bit more movement to them, and usually the harmonic and melodic qualities, even sometimes the texture, the guitar tone itself, reminds me of older rock styles. I never quite pinpointed exactly what era it made me think of, but it certainly feels a bit older than Porcupine Tree tends to feel for me. I very cleanly put them in modern prog rock, not afraid to use heavier tones or heavier drum work, and more frequently focusing on atmospheres and textures that feel like a modern style of rock, more so than some of the atmospheres and textures that we would have seen in like 70s prog rock. However, I also always feel a connection to the older era of music in a way that other modern prog rock bands, like, I don't know, maybe Leprous, I don't always feel. There seems to be a bit more of a divide there, where the older stuff is certainly taking rock in a new direction, the older prog rock, and the newer prog rock is taking rock in a new direction, but there seems to be less of a tie between those. Whereas Porcupine Tree, I always sort of feel that inspiration from older groups. But here, it's very directed. It's straight up in the composition. The guitar work feels like it comes from those older prog rock bands. Not sure what that's about. When it comes to Steve Wilson, I assume everything it Steven, I think that's the second time I've called him Steve. When it comes to Steven Wilson, I don't know why my brain does that. When it comes to him though, I feel like everything's intentional. So it makes me want to get more into the lyrics to see what's going on there. Maybe there's an allusion to time past, time of the past. Because the song is called Time Flies, it's certainly about time passing. I think time is a concept in here in general. And so, being that it's about time, a throwback idea to an older era of music makes sense somehow. I'm just not quite sure how yet. This all gives way to the middle section, which is terrifying ambience. It doesn't start out terrifying, but it does start out ambient, taking a lot of this focus on static elements and leaning into it even further. Instead of having a rhythmic idea to go along with the chords, it's just the chords now. The thing is, though, is that the chords are beginning to express a darker edge, and we begin to feel something a bit more ominous, a bit more brooding. There is a darkness to this section that we didn't quite hear earlier. That was static, but more positive. There was some moments of negativity to it, a little bit of, a dash of sadness here or there, something like that, a tense chord they might lean into for a moment. But for the most part, it was not necessarily brighter, but more positive. We get to this midpoint, though, and it is consumed by negativity. There is a dash of brightness in it now compared to the overwhelming sense of dread that appears throughout most of it. And we eventually get a guitar solo on top of it that is just pain. But what I love about this, okay, so let me focus on the pain for a second, and then I'm going to dive into guitar tone. This whole thing is guitar bends and just long held out notes, ways to slowly modulate the pitch. It feels like the guitar is just wailing constantly, mixed with the the darker harmonies that are being played in the guitar melody against the chords, and also the darkness of the chord progression under it. It just feels like pain. It's anguish being lashed out sonically through an instrument. It's painful to listen to. It's beautiful in some regards, but it also feels like somebody just expelling all of this tense anger, sadness all at once. And it doesn't end either. I think this is a fascinating part about it. This is certainly a song that is monotonous. It is repetitive. The sections go on forever. It is not a song I think I'm going to return to often, primarily because from a casual listening perspective, I didn't really enjoy it. It sits closer to to post rock than anything else, really focusing on these long drawn out moments of engaging with an atmosphere. There isn't a lot of movement to a lot of it. It's all done on purpose, though. There's an artistic element to it. I really appreciate this track from a critical or artistic lens, but I did find myself growing bored with it at times. This was one of those parts where I didn't, though. The guitar solo is incredibly engaging. And even cooler is that underneath it, there's some really cool drum parts going on. And outside of it, there's polyrhythmic ideas going on with the piano. And we'll talk about rhythm later. There's some cool things in here I want to touch on. But yeah, the song right here is expressing disconnect in a lot of ways. We have the anguish of the guitar. We have polyrhythm. We have this wild melodic drum part in the background that's almost acting as a quasi counterpoint to the guitar work. I find it really difficult not to engage with this on some level, intellectually or emotionally, just given how much information is being portrayed each moment, despite the fact that overall the section is moving rather slowly. What I find most interesting, though, is the guitar stops wailing at some point, and we return to the beginning. And you might be thinking, Bryan, you said there that you view this in three parts, but if we go back to the beginning, we're just going back to an earlier part. That's not really a third part. And yeah, I mean, you'd be right. This is kind of an inversion of our earlier section. Ignoring the fact that we have a whole verse chorus, post chorus idea, we could look at the beginning of the song as A, the bridge, the atmospheric section that leads into the guitar solo, as B. This last, 2 minutes of the track, I don't really view as a C. I view it as an A with a tick mark next to it. It's a variation on a concept we've already heard. It brings back the rhythmic qualities of our A section. It brings back well, it doesn't really bring back the pace of the chord progression because it's not like our B section really sped up at all. We kind of had that same pace to how often we changed our chords, but we bring back many of the chord qualities that we had from our A section. There's just more movement to it. It sort of glitters in a way. And part of this is contrast. It's what kind of confused me leading into this section. And I was like, I think this is stuff that we heard earlier. And to this point, I'm even not entirely sure. I'm fairly confident that the rhythm is the same, but I'm not entirely confident that the chord progression is identical. Nor am I even confident that the guitar tones, the timbres of the instruments, are identical. Because after spending so much time in that B section, the darkness of it all, this brightness feels fresh. It feels invigorating. It might be the exact same stuff we heard earlier, but it feels so different in context. Where I was kind of over the slow moving pace of our A section at the beginning of the song, when we entered it at the end, it felt like we were actually going somewhere. There was momentum to it. It was still a slower pace, but I could see where we were going, and some of that bitter sweetness doesn't feel as bitter anymore. It's brighter. It's sort of happier all over. I find it really difficult to compare it directly to the A section because I can't do that. That B section triggered something in my mind so strongly that what I think might be the exact same thing feels so different that it's affected my memory. Is this even what we listened to at the beginning of the song? I do think there are a couple of new ideas. There is a triplet piano pattern that we hear at the end that I know was something similar in the B section. It played around the guitar solo on the piano, although there it was actually 4/4 against the 3. Now we have a 3 against the core 4. I don't remember that in the A section though. There was a piano, but I don't think it played polyrhythmically against everything else. But aside from that, there's very little in here that I think is new. And yet the section feels entirely brand new. It feels fresh. It feels so optimistic in a way that the song hasn't. To me, this is one of my favorite ways to go about recontextualization, which is a term we've talked about in the past. Recontextualization is basically just taking something that we've heard before and putting it in a new context. Usually, what that means is we'll take a riff or a rhythmic pattern from another section and put it in a later section. Maybe it is Maybe our perception of it is altered if it's a rhythmic idea because there's a new drum pattern played against it. And so now instead of being with the drums, it's against it, creating syncopation. So we have a new context for it, and thus we have a new understanding of that rhythm. Sometimes it's a melody. It'll be in one section at one time, and then we'll just throw it in at another time. This is something that we see often with refrains, especially in musicals or rock operas, where they will bring back the melody and lyrics from another song and put it into a new song. And so those words might mean something new in the context of this new track or against some other words that they might be singing alongside. This, though, gives us mostly everything we heard before, but recontextualizes it through experience. What was bittersweet at one point, after focusing primarily on the bitter, we've now sort of come to a point where it is less effective. We're so used to the bitterness that the bitter part of the bittersweet isn't as strongly resonant, and so the sweet part comes out even stronger. I think that's what's happening here. It's like if you take a sip of a sugary drink and you're like, dang, that's sweet. And then you eat a whole bowl of ice cream and then you take a sip of that sugary drink and the sugar doesn't quite hit you the way that it might have the first time around. Your taste buds are a bit more used to it. Now you just sort of taste that syrupy flavor of whatever it is. That's kind of what happens here. Maybe. I'm very interested in giving this another listen, getting rid of the B section in the middle, and then just running the opening 5 minutes right into the final two, and seeing if there is actually any change there. My gut tells me there isn't. A couple of new ideas, but for the most part, it is the same thing. There is one actual change to this section, though, in that there is more movement on the guitar. Instead of just strumming chords, there is some outlining going on, but it doesn't really change the harmonic property much. It just changes the pacing, allows it to feel like it's moving forward a little bit with some momentum, but the rhythmic idea isn't changed much. Speaking of rhythm, I'm curious if the tempo changes at all. I don't know. Now, on the topic of rhythm, there are some really cool ideas in here, primarily looking at rhythmic diversity. Simultaneous rhythmic diversity, I think that's what we'll look at. Every piece of this song can be felt in 4/4. There is a heavy triplet vibe going on in the ending, and we do have a shift 2, 3, 4, depending on your perspective, for our B section as well, the atmospheric middle. We do get a 3 against 4 concept, and in one case, actually in the middle of the track, we sort of get an interrupted hemiola. I had mentioned that the snare came in on beat 5 of a 2-bar grouping of threes, right? So we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you got that emphasis on 5 with the snare hit. That is how the first half of the ambient section was built. There is a cymbal and eventually a piano that emphasizes a 4/4 across this, though. And when we break that up, we have groupings of 2 against 3, where, 4 against 6, we just cut both in half. 2 against 3 as a polyrhythm is known as hemiola. What's interesting, though, is that when we do break this up, there is pretty much little or no accenting on the first group of 3 against 2, but on the second group, we have an accent on the middle of the 3, what would be beat 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the second beat in this group of 3. So we sort of feel this hemiola, kind of, in this moment, but we only get the middle beat of the 3 and we have no accent point on the 4. We just have a laying out of the 2 beats that is going to be showing up there. It's a bizarre feeling that I don't know if everyone's going to feel, But this, I think, is why the snare on the 5 felt so odd to me. Because when I thought about it, I was like, okay, it's not really that strange. If we cut it down and assume that the 6 is actually 8, well, 6 with eighth notes, let me put it that way, and we bring it back to 4, it comes out to 3/4, which means that it's just a snare hit on 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's odd, but it's not strange. I think it's this right here where the snare comes between two piano hits at the end of a phrase with almost no other accent points that makes it feel odd. It feels incomplete, like an idea trying to start or getting the tail end of a sentence without knowing what comes before it. It almost makes no sense within its own context. It's a hyper focus on something that is sort of meaningless without context. And that feels bizarre to me. I don't know what that means. But yeah, very strange. We continue this idea of hemiola in once we return back to the brighter couple of minutes of this track, and the hemiola, because we have more accent points, because we have more notes across both the 4 and the 3, makes a lot more sense. This feels very much like an incomplete image, hyper focusing on an incomplete image, and yeah, very strange concept, especially against the darkness and tension that's going on here. I don't know that I get it. I feel lost thinking about it. Like, I just none of it makes any sense to me. What I do love out of this though is that the drums evolve a concept that focuses on ghost notes and these really tight like 2-hit snare rolls, but they're like back to backs like da 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 da. Just these really tight snare hits with both sticks, I'm assuming, which I guess technically isn't a roll, but whatever. They just sound great in the context against the counter rhythm, against the wailing of the guitar, and it feels like the drums are trying to piece everything together. They're the only thing that has any momentum to it, the only thing that's pushing forward. It's almost as if the drums are trying to drag everything into the brightness that comes in the final 2 minutes of the track. After being an incomplete concept for so long, they're like, no, you know what, I'm gonna be what gets us out of this, and I love that whole concept there. I think it works well. um and I think that about wraps up my thoughts on this. It's an exploration of time, it's an exploration of feeling. There's some interesting rhythmic ideas going on. Overall, I know what I felt, but I don't know what it means. And that's usually where the lyrics step in. When it comes to stuff like this, I mean, it's bittersweet, and then it's pain, and then it's brightness. And that could represent a lot of stories or concepts or ideas. Lyrics tend to focus those down a little bit. So, let's read into those and see what's going on. So, lyrically, this is a song about time passing by and looking back on your youth as an adult. Verse 1 says, I was born in 67, the year of Sergeant Pepper, and are you experienced into a suburban heaven? It should have been forever. It all seems to make so much sense. So, really wanting his childhood to last longer, especially as good as it was back then. Even calling his life a suburban heaven. The chorus says, but after a while, you realize that time flies, and the best thing you can do is take whatever comes to you. Which, yeah, that's accurate. Time passes you by whether you want it to be static or not. You have no control. The arrow of time continues to march on and stops for nobody. Verse 2 says, she said luck is what you make it. You just reach out and take it. Now let's dance a while. She said nothing ever happens if you don't make it happen, and if you can't laugh and smile. The idea that you have to, if you have goals and ambitions in life, you need to make them happen. You need to take the steps necessary to go through with it. Luck is what you make of it. I don't know if I completely agree with that, but I can see where it's coming from, right? No matter how lucky you are, if you don't make any steps towards your goal, you're not going to complete it. No one's going to just show up at your house and say, "Hey, Mr. Wilson, do you want a record deal?" if you don't actually make music first and try to get it out there. So there is some luck in the process, but I like the idea that luck is what you make it. All right, I'm coming around to that line. But she says you have to be happy about it too. Nothing happens if you don't laugh and smile. So he's reflecting on this advice that was given to him by a friend. And the post chorus mentions that so the chorus ends with "'cause time flies." The post chorus comes in and says, "and laughing in the summer showers, that's still the way I see you now." So this person's reflecting on this other person from, their childhood that they were close to, that gave them wise advice, and they've had to leave this suburban heaven in order to pursue their dreams, and it separated them from this person. This, I believe, is where the bridge comes in. And the way that I felt what the bridge meant at this point doesn't really line up with the lyrics. I'm going to talk about this in a second. I have my own interpretation of this, but in a rare case, I don't think it's supported too broadly by the lyrics, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. But first, let's push forward with the final verse. It says, "I could tell what you were thinking while you were sitting here drinking, but I'm not sure where to start. You see, there's something wrong here. I'm sorry if I'm not clear. Can you stop smoking your cigar?" I don't know what this implies. Everything else, the chorus, the two verses that came before it, and the outro eventually, which is a reflection of our post chorus earlier, all speak from the first person view of this person who grew up in the suburbs, had this friend who gave them advice, they left to pursue their dreams, and now they're reflecting back on this stuff. I don't know who this person would be talking to in this verse, though, unless in the present time they've met back up with this old friend. This verse is very ambiguous to me. They have something on their mind they wish to tell this other person. We don't know who this other person is, but they're also a bit upset or annoyed by the fact that they're just sitting here smoking a cigar. I don't know how to read into it. And as soon as this ends, it says, "But after a while, you realize time flies, and the best thing you can do is take whatever comes to you." The chorus comes back in. The outro then says, "And the coat you wore to Alton Towers is still the way I see you now." So the "you" in this song, in every instance of this song, represents this person who gave him advice in his youth, this old friend. And so if that "you" is the one here who he's trying to talk to in verse 3, it must be about people aging. You leave your home for even 5 years. You go out and see the world, you do your thing as a rock star. You come back later, you try to meet up with some of your old friends, and they're not who they were back then, are they? Time flies. It changes the things around you, the things you do, and most importantly, it changes you. And that "you" isn't just you, it's you. Everyone is changed by time. So I wonder if this third verse is a little bit of tinged with regret. I have a lot of things I want to tell you. We're sitting here drinking. I'm not sure where to start though, right? It could be that there's some regret for leaving or for not pursuing extension to the relationship while he was here, or who knows. There's so many things on his mind. He doesn't know where to start. But he's clearly a bit upset. He says there's something wrong here. Can you stop smoking your cigar, please? And I wonder if, paired with the outro, which says, I still remember you the way that you were in my memories, that the current version of them just isn't lining up with who they thought they would grow up to be, or that they're no longer a reflection of who they were when they were together, when they were friends, whatever in the past. And the sadness that comes from that. The end of a relationship certainly sucks, but a chance to rekindle it only to find out it's not really a person you want to spend time with anymore kind of sucks more. I wonder if that's what the third verse is going for. But see, the third verse brings about some brightness to it in the music. It's a recontextualization of all of that longing that we had in our first two verses, a remembrance of the past. This is a disillusionment of the present. The music doesn't really sell me on that like the first two verses do. Which is where my own interpretation of the music comes into play. I had this concept floating around in my head, and as I read the first couple of verses, I really thought this is where the song was going. As I mentioned yesterday on the Steven Wilson track, when it comes to Steven's writing, I tend to be right on track with him. When I'm listening to the music, I know exactly what he's trying to tell me through the music, through compositional ideas, through the production, and when we get to the lyrics, everything just clicks. It's like everything I expected the lyrics to be about based on the music are what the lyrics are about. I don't think I've listened to any song written by Steven Wilson where I haven't immediately picked up on the topics and themes that the music is exploring. So I find it really interesting that I have this disconnect at the back end of the track. Because to me, the static nature of the music that happens in our A section, the first verse and chorus, and the second verse and chorus, this is about, I kind of felt, trying to keep time locked in place, about trying to fight the flow of time. Time flies, but maybe I can contain it. Maybe I can focus in on it. And the lyrics sort of move in that direction. It's a recollection of the past, someone living in their past, frequently self inserting themselves into their memories to re experience them. It is also, through that concept of memories as a whole, staying in a specific place. The music fully leans into this, and it's the bittersweetness of it, remembering the good times and also realizing that you can't go back to them. They're just things that you have in your head now. Then we reach the darkness of the bridge. It starts out rather static and then leans into pain. This easily fits this theme right here, where we explore somebody who is so discontent with the way that time is now, expressing all of the pain and anguish and negative feelings they have associated with being so fixated on the past. But they get dragged out of that into a brighter future. The final few minutes of this track recontextualize the past. We still have these slower moving ideas, but they're seen with a bit more brightness and joy and positivity, a reflection and growth of the main character to pursue a future which still honors the past and remembers it, but doesn't focus in on it. They're now allowed to take steps forward and allow time to go, to move alongside the flow of time as it flies rather than try to fight the forces they can't. That was the story the music told me. Finding your darkest moment and coming out of it growing, understanding that the things that you can't do, the things that you can do, and how best to take that next step. And I don't really think the lyrics lean into that. We have somebody who doesn't change at all. By the end of the song, they're still focusing on the past. The way I envision you is the coat that you wore all those years ago. It feels strange to me then that I had such a transformative experience coming back into this final moment, but I wonder if that is because of the contrast. If it is true that our C section utilizes pretty much the same ideas of our A, and I was simply speaking about the bitterness sort of being accommodated to it so that I felt the part of it less, and it was just the sweet part of the bittersweet that I was focusing on at the end, that might be a subjective personal feeling and experience with that final bit of the song, and the intent was actually to come out of the darkness of the B section exactly where we were with the A, having done absolutely no work to push forward and change and grow. All we did was wind up back where we were, disillusioned and focusing on the past. Those are my thoughts. Porcupine Trees, Time Flies. Let me know what you thought of this track. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or even correct me on, put all that stuff down in the comments section alongside your general thoughts, opinions, and perspectives. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this one, but we do have a special selection coming up next. Stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.